I'm Cheryl, I'm a digital artist, and I'm here to share some tips. Let's start with some basic and technical stuff. Use a big canvas. Unless you're making pixel art, it will be best if you have a big area to work on, so your lines don't look pixelated. I like to stick with 2000 by 2000 or 3000 by 3000 if it's a more complex piece. About DPI is the resolution of your canvas. The standard for printing is 300, and for screen you can use 72. Or if you want a little more quality, 96. Color profiles. Use RGB for screen and CMYK for printing, or else your colors will look off. So now let's move on to sketching. Flip the canvas all the time. Something that looks okay can very well not be okay, and you will only notice that if you flip the canvas. Doing this will help you make sure that everything looks proportional. If it's not proportional, you can redraw it, but you can also use liquify. Drag everything into place. Just be careful about becoming too dependent on it. Like I have, you don't have to sketch on a white background. Actually, you probably shouldn't. It could start straining your eyes after a while. So consider using other colors like light grays, neutral tones, or light colors in general. You can always switch it back to white when it's time for coloring. Next session, line art. Let's talk about line weight. The difference in thickness within a line. One common mistake beginner artists make is that their line weight will be random. Well, not random, just not purposeful either. Normally looking like this. The edge is thinner and the middle wider. That's naturally what will happen if you're not actively thinking about it. So here's some advice on how to fix it. Make lines thicker where they meet, in their intersections. Consistency. Don't exaggerate on how much the width will change. Try to find the sweet spot. Make objects that are closer to the camera have thicker lines, getting progressively thinner as it gets further away. Detail lines should be thinner than the ones that compose the more important forms. One thing that seems obvious but isn't is that the stroke that you make doesn't have to be the final line. Sometimes you can't control the pen pressure very well, and that's okay. You can edit them later by zooming in and thickening the areas that you want and erasing the parts that you want to be thinner. Vary the type of line that you're using. Try to mix curved lines with straight lines. It will add contrast and more interest to your drawing. Just a pause from the tips to say, you don't have to do anything I say here. Art is supposed to be enjoyable. It's your own self-expression. So if I tell you here to not do something but it's something you enjoy, just ignore me and do whatever makes you happy. Anyway, next section, color. Choosing colors can be a challenge for beginner artists and not so beginner artists. So here are some things to keep in mind. The most important thing to understand is that color is relative. Something can look blue without actually being blue. It's all about context and contrast, so don't worry too much about the actual color you're using. Care about how it looks in the overall painting. When choosing a color palette, in order for it to look more harmonious, you can put a color over it and lower the opacity. Now all the colors will be a little bit closer to each other. Use gradient maps. A gradient map is a way of assigning colors to the values of the painting, like this. I like using one in low opacity in the end of the painting process. 9 times out of 10, it will make it look better. Light bounces. The colors around you will reflect on you, and vice versa. If you're wearing a white shirt next to a red wall, there will be a bit of red in your shirt. In the transition between light and shadow, there is generally a more saturated tone than both of them, especially on skin. Be careful with green. This is the color that I see misused the most, especially in environmental paintings. Green is the color with the bigger spectrum, what makes it very hard to pick a good shade. One thing you can do to get a better understanding of green is to save some landscape pictures and color pick the greens to see what their actual shade is. You'll soon realize that actual bright greens are very rare. Also, be careful with pure white. The white in the eyes, not pure white. The teeth, definitely not pure white. Using it can really flatten the drawing. Try using light tones that in comparison will look white. Like I've said, color is relative. When inserting a character into an environment, you're rarely using their real colors. Unless you're doing a very cartoony style, the environment should affect how your character looks. One easy hack to do this quickly is to grab the most predominant color around them, so generally the sky or the walls. Put it over the character and mess with the opacity and layer modes until it looks good. Of course, there's a lot more to it, so go study color theory. You can start your painting in black and white and add color later. Every time I do a painting in color, I lose a lot of time trying to balance good values and good colors, generally adding a few more hours to the process. But you can paint in black and white and add color later, so you can focus in one at a time. I'll show you two methods to do so. One, you paint the colors over it and change the layer mode to color. It may work with other types too, like multiply or overlay. Test what looks better for that individual piece. The problem with that is that the shadows will just be a darker value of the color you're using, which is not ideal. So I like to apply a gradient map to the black and white layer so I can choose the highlight colors and the shadow colors. 2. The other way of doing this is by selecting different areas and applying a gradient map to each one, so you can determine the whole spectrum to each color. Now let's talk about shading. To create shadows that look good very easily, just pick a bright color, like purple or blue, set it to multiply and block out the areas that you want, then lower the opacity to what looks good. If you don't want to shade with multiply, but choose each color shadow individually, please don't just lower the value. Also increase the saturation and slightly shift the hue. Be careful with airbrushes. Airbrushes are very useful for creating gradients and filling big areas with color. But if you're using it for shading, you should probably be careful. Shading with an airbrush will make so your shapes have no sharp edges, making everything look too rounded and too soft. But if you really want to use it, here's my suggestion. After you shade it, grab a sharp-edged eraser and go over some areas. Think about it like this. The bigger the angle between planes, the sharpest the shadow will be. But honestly, in the long run, it will be better if you found a brush that you can make look good with fewer steps. It will save you a lot of time. Don't shade with black. You've probably heard this already, and there's a good reason for that. If you're doing soft shading with black or gray, it will make your colors look very muddy and, well, not appealing. One thing people forget to mention, however, is that if you're doing cel shading with only sharp edges, using black shadows can very well be a good choice, as long as you're not planning on lowering the opacity. Add a rim light. A finishing touch that can help your art piece look more three-dimensional is by adding a rim light. Basically, add a light source behind your subject. This will allow you to define shapes to areas that beforehand were only in shadow. Instead of adding shadows, you can do the inverse. Shade everything and then erase the areas that are hit by the light. Next, art style. People seem to worry a lot about art styles, and I can't blame them for it. It's what gives art personality, and of course you want your art to have personality. But the thing is, it will come naturally for you. Enjoy the ride you'll take to get there. Although I'm happy with the way that I draw, I'm still trying to figure out my painting style. I don't know how I want my line art, I don't know if I want to do full paintings, if I want a mix of both, and that's okay. It's more than okay actually. It's good. It got me a job. I was, and still am, experimenting with a lot of different styles. In a job interview, I was told that what catch their attention about my portfolio was the variety, and how it looked like I could paint in many different ways. And that's what got me the job. If I was stuck in my comfort zone and not tried anything new, I probably wouldn't have evolved that much. So please, don't rush yourself into settling for a style. Experiment the most that you can, and throughout the years of doing that, you'll find what works perfectly for you. And my final tip is, art is never finished. It just stops moving. You have to make the decision when it's good enough. Not every part of your drawing has to be fully rendered. You can just focus on the most important parts. Or you can choose not to render at all. It's okay for a sketch just to be a sketch sometimes. Because you know, art takes a long time and you will not always have a lot of time. So consider that and make smart decisions. So these were my tips. I really hope they helped you. And if you're interested in writing or making OCs, you should watch this video I made about how to write more complex characters. So this is it. Thank you for watching.